Online meetings. The moment where you realize that visiting your mother-in-law isn't that bad after all. Online meetings now became a part of our everyday life. Unfortunately, the reality we see is often not very productive and, which is even worse, often not very satisfying. When you look into feedbacks of people who, were part of online meetings, it often says it was quite boring, took too long, wasn't really focused, I couldn't really follow, I didn't remember much of what has been said, and of course I'm not even talking about technical issues. So today we are going to look into what is it that makes online meetings so difficult for many people. The main problem is, and I'm going to give you 6 very specific tips today. The main problem today is, before we get to these 6 tips, is that most advice you read, especially online, is not only plain wrong, but plain very, very obviously too superficial. I just give you examples of what I just read today. So tips which I read today. Number 1 is you have to be sure that you have the right lighting. So here's a very important point. People didn't hire you to be a supermodel. When you have something relevant to say what brings the company or the project forward and you're sitting in a bit too dark area, no one will complain. When you talk, have nothing to say, but the lighting is perfect, people will leave the online meeting for one reason or the other. And especially when you talk for longer and you have nothing to say, people will get plain bored. Aspect number 2 of what I read today was take care that you have the right background. Okay, just one example. Last week, I was invited to see a presentation at Klubben, which is a very prestigious management club. And when the presenter started his talk, he first started the presentation program. Then he said, oh, I forgot something. Obviously, some prop he wanted to use in front of the camera. Got up, and when he got up, we simply saw that first, on the back of the wall, obviously some paint already came off the wall. And let's put it in the nicest way possible, the bed wasn't very tidy. And that already is a compliment to what we saw there. He came back, sat down, and delivered the best presentation online, which I have seen for weeks, if not months. Great value, really relevant for entrepreneurs, and really thought-provoking. No one at the end lost a single word about the background. The other reason why you shouldn't talk about backgrounds is it is basically common sense. When you have people who have a junkyard as their background when they meet clients online, I have not to question your people, I have to question your hiring techniques and the work of your HR department, what kind of people you hired and how little you obviously trained them. Aspect number 3, the appearance. Of all online meetings, and now I will be in the hundreds this year alone with online meetings, all online meetings I've been to, not a single person was dressed inappropriately. Not a single one. I simply don't see people turning up in their pajamas, but obviously the corporate is scared that people show up naked. I have no idea where you have this idea from, that people have the wrong appearance. And especially when you lecture on what kind of appearance is right or wrong, you treat your people like school children, if not worse. So we should get to the real tips. What are the reasons why your meetings are so boring, or why people perceive it as boring? 6 tips. Aspect number 1, the people. Most meetings are based on, oh, I invite the people I know who are part of this project. And then you have a meeting with 10, 15 or 20 people. Just to get that straight, there isn't particularly a maximum number of people who can meet, but there's a maximum number of people who actually have something to say. When you call people to a meeting, they will, just to be polite, be a part of it, but when they know they have very little aspects or very little stake in this project, they will be plain bored. People invite too many people and they invite them by too short notice. So the very first point is it is way better to have shorter meetings with smaller groups than simply having one meeting with a huge group. I heard of one, let's say, luxury retail company, the name is not relevant here, who held an online meeting with 400 team leaders. What do you think people get out of that? Every one of these 400 notes, it's not tailored to me, it's going to be a general PowerPoint presentation, and it was plain boring because, as usual, some presenter who obviously was not trained to do so read out slides. That is something which bores people to death. You can always see that people are very bored when they start to say something like, oh, wait, just to save bandwidth, I'm going to turn off my video. And I'm getting back to that point when we come to our last point. So first point, the people. Second point, the agenda. Often I see there is no agenda at all. And the reason why people don't set an agenda is otherwise someone could say, oh, that's not really for me. Thank you for the invite, but I say no. And it's perfectly fine when someone does that. When you have an agenda, it means some people could say, look, I have maybe only the controlling side of it, and this is more about the doing side of it. It doesn't talk at all about budget. It doesn't talk about invoicing. It doesn't talk about the client. There is nothing financial in there. Could you please either name me what's in there for me or simply just accept that I'm not part of that? Keep your meetings efficient. I'm sorry, I have to be the German here again, as you can hear by this charming accent. The German says efficiency is what makes you more productive, and that is not even news to you. So very important is when you have an agenda, you will attract the right people. And of course, coming with that, this was tip number 2. Tip number 3 is the time. I often see that meetings are scheduled on the day when work begins. So for example, Monday 9 a.m. or Monday 8 a.m. Never schedule meetings when the day just began, for a very simple reason. Normally, 15 or 10 minutes before the meetings begin, something will have gone wrong. Maybe when you're a retail chain, you're just reopening, something's not working. Some major issue will happen and people will not be able to take part in your meeting. Or they will be there, but do something else besides the meeting. Do not schedule meetings when the day just began, and do not schedule meeting when the day comes to an end, because no one wants to run over time and then have to reschedule everything they planned after work was finished. Also, when you are a very sales-driven organization, be sure that you cannot even remotely think about setting the time to 9 a.m. to 12 noon, for a very simple reason. When you are a company that heavily works on the phone, so you have to talk to people, you have to meet them maybe. Meeting at the moment is not possible, or only in a very limited amount of companies it's possible, so you stick to the phone. If you have a number of people who say, I have limited access to clients at the moment, many of them are decision makers who work maybe part-time, so they're only there until noon, the time between 9 a.m. and 12 noon is holy. If you schedule meetings there, you actively, very actively tell your people you can make less revenue. But at the same time, you expect them to make the revenue and the profit which you planned with. So that means you have to allow them to have their time between 9 a.m. and 12 noon to get in contact with clients. So stick to the right timing. Aspect number 4 is perspective. I saw that many people do it right because they simply use the camera which is in their notebook, a built-in camera, which is fine. Some people use an external camera, and then they put it slightly left or slightly right of their notebook. And then often they use these kind of stands. I'm now going to open one of these. Just this is how it looks like, and now I can put the camera on there. What you think you look like? You think you look like a really professional podcast host, like slightly from the left, slightly to the right, TV studio. Yeah. What you really look like is someone who doesn't talk to the people, but you talk to your notebook, while at the same time people only see either your left half or your right half, which of course disengages them with the content you try to provide. Perspective means try to put it on eye level. If you have a small notebook, that can be quite challenging, so put something under your notebook that you try to get to close at eye level as possible. And some people, and this is the reason why you always take selfies from the top, it's always a bit nicer to take a picture from a higher level, #double chin. So that's something someone actually said on a meeting. He thought that when the apocalypse is coming, he has to do less effort for avoiding double chin. So when you have the right perspective, it is eye level or slightly higher than eye level, but not too high. Aspect number 5, and that is a very important one, is sound. Invest in a professional microphone. Of course, when you're employed somewhere, your employer is going to buy that for you. If you're an online gamer, you already have one of these microphones, most likely for the team stuff you do during your games. But in some notebooks, the built-in microphone simply is not good enough. And especially when you have smartphones and you have the smartphone somewhere outside because you're sitting on your veranda, maybe you're a bit more open-minded company. It is nice what you plan to do, but these microphones are not designed to get rid of noise which happens in the background, like a car driving by or something else that happens in the neighborhood. So be sure that you have a professional microphone. It doesn't have to be a studio microphone, but as professional as possible. These are available for quite cheap money. I use a Rode mic here, and that's just perfect and definitely good enough to do any kind of podcast in any kind of environment. I use it for years already. Aspect number 6 is the most important one, and it is camera and microphone. Tell people to keep camera and microphone on for a very simple reason. Maybe you know the moment that someone says, oh, look, we have like bandwidth issues here. So just to save bandwidth so the meeting stays fluent, and maybe you heard that some of these providers have tech problems. So I'm just going to turn off my camera and sound here to save bandwidth. Yeah, that's the best excuse and the nicest way to tell people, look, I'm not interested in what you're doing here. I'm actually doing something else. And the easiest trick, because often people will say, oh, that won't work because we engage with our people. What happens is people have their camera turned off and they have their mic turned off. As soon as I hear my name, I only say, oh, sorry, that was just cut off. Could you please repeat the question because I only heard half of it? And you will never be able to prove that I did something else and didn't even listen to what you said before. Keep people engaged by keeping camera and microphone open. It's very important to do that because that is the only way how you can create interaction. Talk less, ask more questions, and ask specific questions about what is happening in the project you're talking about. Keep the group small, keep the time short. That's how you engage in an online environment. The more people you invite and the longer the meeting is, the less efficient you will be. And of course, often people ask, okay, do you have something more about remote work and how this all works? And do you have something which I can forward to my boss, etc., etc.? Yes, we do have that. Just go to expert-letter.nb-networks.com. Sign up there. You get an email every week, 100% content, 0% advertising. It's content only, and we do it every week for free. And this is an ad-free guarantee which we give you here. And we will always give you the newest approaches to leadership, the newest approaches to how to organize work in the modern world. And you always have hints to our podcast. You have articles. We also have a question of the week, which we use for research methods. So it's all content which you will be able to use completely free of charge. And now, of course, what you should do now is don't go back to your team and tell them, look, I listened to this podcast and we have to do it all different from tomorrow. This is not how the world works. Try to implement the first idea with your meetings. Look at your team. How can you split up your team with smaller meetings? And maybe instead of doing the 90-minute meeting on Monday morning, just say, give them Monday morning to arrive at work, have the first meeting after the lunch break, maybe not directly so they are not in this kind of hole, they are a bit more awake, but do short meetings, specific meetings, targeted meetings, and people will appreciate what you have done for them. I wish you all the best implementing this in your organization, and for today I can only say thank you very much for your time.